Mo's journey in politics commenced here in these debates, and she would later go on to serve in the House of Commons for 14 years with a tremendous distinction. Mo was first elected to Westminster in 1987, and her career in some ways illustrates how unpredictable life and politics can turn out to be. I've no doubt that when Mo took her first political steps, and that her ambitions were to serve her constituents in Redcar and do her best for the northeast of England and for the wider British public. And of course Mo did all these things and fulfilled her ambitions in that respect. But I'm pretty sure that when Mo Mowlam set out on her early political career, she would never have imagined that she would be one day become one of the most loved and most admired politicians in Irish history. Now, I know that I'm dangerous saying this here, but in some ways, being a British politician and even to be considered to be loved in Irish history is a bit of a contradiction, because in most of Ireland we hated every bloody one of the politicians here, and consistently did that for 800 years. And we had our order of merit, which would take me about 6 hours to go through, so I won't do that. But in more recent years that changed, and I think anyone who knows anything about Ireland will just know how much Mo became loved by Irish people, of all persuasions, of all traditions, and of all religions. But that happened, and it's an extraordinary story that encompasses Mo's work and shows how an ordinary English girl with extraordinary abilities made a seismic contribution to peace in our time, and hopefully peace for all time. I think that would be the fitting memory for and tribute to Mo, that the efforts that she put in will last into the dim and distant future. Politicians on both sides of the Irish Sea have got a bad press in recent times. I might be swimming against the tide, but I can hand on heart say that I believe that the people of these islands, in Ireland and Britain, have been well served by a political class in this generation intent on ending the conflicts of the past. I've been lucky for the best part of a quarter of a century of working with them all, successive British governments and successive prime ministers. And Mo Mowlam was to the forefront of the efforts, and she clearly made a huge positive difference in Ireland, north and south, the entire island. In Ireland, people of all political perspectives will always be grateful to her for that. She made an invaluable contribution to creating a more peaceful society, and that for all of us, whether Irish or British, have great cause to be grateful to her. The conflict, students in Northern Ireland, has its roots deep in our shared history. For too long, the relationship between Ireland and Britain had been one of old hatreds and deep suspicions. It's a fact of history that for much of the last century, the problems and conflicts of Ireland were a constant irritation. Lloyd George once described the Irish question as a can of worms. Winston Churchill spoke wearily of the dreary sleepless and steeples of Fermanagh and Tyrone. Harold Wilson suggested that people in Northern Ireland spend their lives sponging on Westminster. John Major made a huge effort, but he was not helped by parliamentary arithmetic. And when future generations study the history of the Irish peace process, it's undeniable that the name of Dr. Marjorie Mowlam will stand tall. Her commitment to peace in Ireland knew no bounds, and she was hugely instrumental in taking the journey of reconciliation so far. It was my pleasure as Taoiseach to work closely with Mo in striving to ensure a closer relationship between our two islands and in furthering the cause of peace. We travelled many miles together. I met up with Mo in opposition. I had several meetings with her in Dublin, several meetings in Belfast, and several meetings with her in Westminster, mainly with Tony Blair, but not always. Met Mo several times in those early days. And both figuratively and literally, on the road to peace, we worked close and walked those miles together. Mo was appointed Secretary of State for Northern Ireland just a short number of weeks prior to me being elected Taoiseach for the first time back in the early summer of 1997. It was a time there was no ceasefire in place. There had been huge bombs in Canary Wharf, destroying a lot of the financial area, costing several billions worth of damage and destruction, as well as killing 2 people. There was the centre of Belfast had been blown up again. Manchester had severe bombs, including again attacks and the killing of police men during that election campaign of 1997. It was a time of real concern that the cycle of murder and mayhem which had strangled the process of the island for too long might once again resume. And from her first day as Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, she put her own unique personal stamp on the job. Her informal, open, humorous approach broke down barriers straight away. Her whole focus was on getting results. She wasn't interested in the old twaddle of talking and talking and talking. She wanted action, she wanted to know the bottom line, she wanted to make movement and progress, get to know people, but not sit around endlessly squawking and talking, as she used to say. I got to know Mo best during the negotiations, as Emma said, on the agreement that eventually was the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. And I couldn't bring you through all the weeks of that agreement, but the discussion started on September 1st, 1997, went on practically non-stop except for the Christmas break, and ended on the 10th of April of 1998. So we worked closely together almost day in, week in, throughout that period. And during the months leading up to April of 1998, there were times when the talk seemed to be going nowhere, but we never gave up. And I think I would be always eternally grateful that Mo Mowlam not alone had a year as the Prime Minister, the year of the British Cabinet at the time, but also had the spirit to keep on going. Many British politicians came to Northern Ireland. Many British politicians were ran out of Northern Ireland. And many British politicians gave up on Northern Ireland. I'm not here tonight to criticise them. In many cases, I don't blame them. They usually came into a welcome. If they got to the first weekend, they did well. Most of them didn't. Mo was different. She stuck in. She walked the streets. She didn't go for huge security, American style, 13 people pushing each other around the streets, trying to act like a front row of a rugby team. Mo got just into it, met the people, talked to people, took the risks. Of course she knew that she was always a target. Any of us who were involved in Northern Ireland were targets. I was on the #1 position on the list for assassination for 17 years. That's because the list was always done alphabetically. It always gave me great confidence to know that the terrorists wouldn't work alphabetically. I always hope they start somewhere else. But anyway, the achievement of the Good Friday Agreement was the highlight of my own political career. And I'll always associate Mo Mowlam with that and with the achievement of the Good Friday Agreement. Mo was a critical player in getting the agreement across the line. Her indomitable spirit, her formidable intellect, good humour were invaluable assets. I should also say that Mo could also be very forthright. Politics in Northern Ireland can be a very masculine world, but this never bothered Mo. And in fact, at times I think she revelled in it. With Mo, what you saw was what you got. If you didn't like it, that was your bad luck. She was amiable, but she had a necessary toughness that ensured no one was going to take any liberties. And she knew how to handle bullies, as I don't know where she learned that one, Emma, but she was well able to them. And Northern Ireland was blessed with many of them, on all sides, whether they were nationalists, republicans, whether they were unionists, or whether they were loyalists. She was able to handle that. I remember at one stage in the talks in Casa Buildings leading up to the Good Friday Agreement, when Mo went through Gerry Adams literally for a shortcut. Gerry had a reputation for being a coldfish, and certainly some viewed him as a hard man. His background, to put it diplomatically, was in militant Republican politics, but this cut no ice with Mo, and certainly did not intimidate her. Gerry learned this to his cost when he was pushing the boat out a little, as is often a part of the game in negotiations of any sort, but particularly Northern Ireland. As the talks progressed, Gerry was trying to open up items that had already been agreed in an attempt to wrangle a few more concessions, but Mo was not having any of it.